Buying a house is probably the best investment you can possibly make. That's what they told me when I was a kid, and that's what you probably have heard your entire life. I mean, buy your house, because at least if you get everything wrong, the value of your house will keep rising and you will build equity at the end of the day. But the problem is that even though that was historically right, things have changed so much in recent years that buying a house is now a problem. In fact, it's not even the best investment out there. In fact, it's not even like the best investment. It's probably one of the worst investments out there, because the entire system is broken. And that's because Wall Street got into the game and destroyed the entire housing market. And in this video, I'm going to explain to you how the Wall Street actually got into the game and broke the entire system, so that buying a house for people like you, for the average person, is just a disaster. So let's get right into it. Now, if you kind of take a look at the median house price over the last 30 or 35 years, you will realize that back in 1990s, house prices were pretty affordable. In fact, even if you take a look at 1990, 1991, up until 1993, house prices didn't even increase. They were at around $120,000. Now, some people might say that, well, that was like 35 years ago. Who cares? It's very normal for prices to actually rise. Haven't you heard of something that we call inflation, where prices consistently rise? Well, in that case, let's just for a moment take a look at what the median income or the median household income back in the same year. So if we go, for example, to 1990s, we'll realize that at this period, the median household income was around $61,000. And now I want you to do the math and take a look how many years of a household income you gotta save in order to be able to afford a house back in 1993. And you will suddenly realize that the price of the house, the price of the average house, was twice the size of the median income. Theoretically, you could literally save 2 years worth of your income and you can buy a house. Of course, that's only in theory, because in practice, you gotta pay taxes, you gotta have a roof over your head during the entire period, you gotta put food on the table, and you have a list of other expenses. But the fact that the price of the house during that period was twice the size of the median household income tells us that houses were pretty affordable. And if you go back to like 1970s and 60s, house prices were extremely much more affordable than they were in 1990s. So what exactly has changed? Now, another thing to consider when you're actually buying a house is the interest rate, because interest rates will have a direct impact on the mortgage rate, and most people who buy houses, at the end of the day, they finance their houses. Most people cannot possibly afford, even if the median house price $120,000 and the median household income is $60,000, you still can't literally afford that house. You gotta go and finance that house through a bank, which means that you gotta get a mortgage. And if you go back to 1990s, suddenly you will realize that mortgage rates were substantially higher than they have been in later years. So for instance, in 1993, the mortgage rates were around 7.5%. And some people might say that, well, if mortgage rates were so high during those years, why do you think that houses were so affordable? I mean, how can a house be affordable when your mortgage rate's like 7.5%? That's as much as they were in 2024, which means that nothing really changed. Well, in reality, you gotta understand that when you're taking a loan, your monthly payments is going to rise if that 7.5% is on a bigger chunk of money. So for instance, back in those years when house prices were low, yes, we had higher mortgage rates, but because house prices were significantly lower as a portion of the average household income, at the end of the day, it ended up being that for most people, buying a house was an affordable thing. Because if you kind of take a look at what happened in later years, that's when you realize the problem. That's when you see that the entire housing market simply broke down to the point where most people cannot possibly afford a house. And in order to illustrate that point, let's just go back to 2016 and you will realize what the changes actually happened during that period. So for instance, this is the median sales price of the houses in the United States back in 2016. The price of the median house has grown by more than 100% to $300,000. So 1993 is $120,000. 2016, it's $300,000. And some people might say that it's very normal for house prices to grow that much because you're looking into a period of 23 years. That's a very long period. So it's very normal that house prices didn't just grow by 50 or 70%, but rather they have actually doubled. You also have to consider the fact that in 2008, there was a housing crash, which means that house prices significantly lost a lot of their value. Now, the problem comes when you take a look at the median household income, because that's where the real problem is. Guess how much is the median household income back in 2016? It is $71,000. Is it more than $61,000 compared to 1993? Well, of course, it's more than that. But here's the thing. What is the percentage increase from $61,000 to $71,000? That's a little over 10%, probably at best case scenario 15%. What is the percentage increase from $120,000 to $300,000? That is more than 100%. So the median household income grew by 15% and the median house prices increased by 120%. Do you see the difference? Suddenly, in a span of 23 years, houses became extremely unaffordable for the vast majority of people. Back in 1993, it was twice the size of the median household income. In 2016, suddenly it's 6 times the household income in order to buy a house in the United States. But why wasn't it a problem back in 2016? Why the housing problem started just in the last couple of years? And the answer is very simple and straightforward. Most people buy their houses with a mortgage, which means that they finance their house with a bank. And if you take a look at the mortgage rates back in 2016, they were 3.5%, which means that it was half than they have been back in 1993. And it's very clear in the chart that you see right here. So even though that house prices have actually increased dramatically while wages actually stayed the same, because interest rates were significantly lower than they were in 1993 and mortgage rates were around 3.5%, most people still could buy a house, because at the end of the day, what matters to the average person is not the entire total price of the house, but the monthly payments he has to make. What percentage of his income he's actually making towards the payments of his mortgage. That's the most important thing. So even though that prices have skyrocketed to $300,000, most people still could make their monthly mortgage payments. Now, the real problem starts when we go to 2024. Here is what actually changed. House prices again rose dramatically from $300,000 to $420,000. This is a substantial increase over such a short period of time. And a lot of people might say, well, what is the big deal? I mean, who cares? As long as people can make their mortgage payments, it shouldn't be a problem, right? So let's take a look at the increase in the median income of the household in the United States. And suddenly you realize that it increased to $80,000. Well, that's a lot of increase, to be honest, but it's absolutely nothing, because if you kind of compare the increase from $300,000 to $420,000, that's almost 40%, or probably more than that. That's more than 40%, probably 45%. Now, the increase from $71,000 to $80,000, that's what, like 13% increase? So house prices rise again by another 40%, but wages rise by 13%. Do you see the problem? And the second biggest problem is that since most houses are actually financed by a mortgage, you realize that in 2024, mortgage rates were as much as they were back in 1993 at around 6.5%. Do you see the problem? Back in 1993, yes, mortgage rates were actually high, but the median household income was half of the price of the house, of the average house. Now, in 2024, mortgage rates are almost the same as they were back in 1993 at 6.5%, but the price of the house is almost 7 times than the median household income. And that creates a problem, because based on this basic math, most people cannot actually afford the house. And even if they afford the house, they will pay a substantial chunk of their income towards making their household, towards making their mortgage payments. And that problem was not really much visible if you go back to 2020 and 2021. Because even though that we had the exact same problem, for instance, if you go back to 2020, first of all, house prices were like $317,000. And that's not really that much of a difference between 2016. You can say that from 2016 to 2020, house prices haven't really increased that much. They just grow to 317,000. And given the fact that the median household income was $78,000, most people didn't really realize any kind of a difference. But the biggest thing that played a role that people didn't realize the problem in the housing market is that the median mortgage rate back in 2020 was 2.6%. Yes, we had a problem in 2020 with the housing market, but when you have mortgage rates of 2.6%, nobody really cares because most people can actually get a super affordable mortgage and buy that house even though that's like 8, 9, or 10 times their income. That's why most people didn't realize. And suddenly we are in 2020 and 2024 and people are like, wait a second. Based on the numbers that we have on the ground right now, the vast majority of people simply cannot afford a house. First of all, houses are too expensive. And secondly, mortgage rates are just too high in order to finance those houses in the first place. Now, the biggest question that a lot of people have, how did we end up with an entirely broken housing system? And the answer to that is very simple. In order to answer this question, we have to do something different. We have to go slightly back in history because without understanding where that problem actually came, we won't be able to understand what's happening. Because at the end of the day, if you want to understand any problem, you have to go to the root of the problem. And the root of the problem is that 2008 financial crisis had the biggest impact on the United States economy in the 21st century. In fact, if you kind of take a look at the broader look at the 2008 financial crisis, you will realize that this crisis was almost as big as the crisis of 1929, which was the Great Depression. Of course, the Great Depression lasted like a 10-year period or something like that, or probably longer than that. But what differentiates the 2008 financial crisis is that the Fed actually intervened heavily and printed so much money. If something like that was actually happening back in 1929, I don't think that crisis would be as big as the 2008 financial crisis. Anyways, if you go back to the period pre-2008 financial crisis, you will realize that Wall Street mainly invested in commercial real estate. Wall Street didn't really care about single-family houses, for example, and most of the investments that came out, for example, from real estate investment funds or BlackRock or Blackstone or any kind of other financial institutions that invested in real estate, they would buy commercial real estate. And that means that they basically purchased those houses, whether with cash or mortgages, and then leased them to other businesses, to other companies like offices, warehouses, factories, or anything like that. And that was pretty much what Wall Street basically did. And Wall Street didn't see any point in going into the single family houses because it was a problem to get into that market. It was a very brutal market. Prices wouldn't really rise as much, and it was something that Wall Street didn't really care much. But everything happened in 2008. Now, if you remember 2008, house prices dropped by 30, 40, in some cases 50%, and probably in some cases even more than that. Now, when you have a market that is filled, that is oversupplied with any kind of a product, what do you think is going to happen to the prices? Prices are going to drop substantially. So those people, for example, who purchased the house for $500,000 and they're making a mortgage payment, let's say of $3,500 on a mortgage on a house that costs $500,000, suddenly see the value of their houses drop to $300,000, and now they're like, why am I making a $5,000 mortgage payment when I can actually go to the market, get the exact same similar house in the neighborhood, and I can make a $2,000 mortgage payment or $1,800 mortgage payment? Like, I'm literally overpaying. So that mentality led more people to actually sell their houses and get out of their mortgages that didn't really make any sense, especially when we had this financial crisis and hundreds of thousands of people actually lost their jobs and also couldn't make their mortgage payments. So the market was filled with a lot of houses. Now, this was the point when Wall Street realized that, We have an opportunity. This is our opportunity to get in and buy those houses at a fraction of their price at 50% discount, 60% discount, 70% discount. Because imagine you want to get out of your mortgage. Who are you going to sell your houses? Your neighbor who can't really afford his mortgage payments? Your neighbor who used to work in the Lehman Brothers and now he lost his job? Who are you going to sell your houses to? That's when hedge funds and other Wall Street financial institutions realized an opportunity and they jumped in and they started buying those houses in bulk. They started buying thousands of houses, tens of thousands of houses, in some cases probably hundreds of thousands of houses. So after 2008, we had a lot of those financial institutions in Wall Street with a bunch of houses that they knew that they will wait a year or two when the Fed will actually bail out a lot of those companies and house prices will come back and they will rent the exact same houses to the exact same people at a higher price. All they had to do is just buy them now and hold and wait for the opportunity for the market to recover. And that's exactly what has happened. Especially when those people in Wall Street had a lot of cash. People don't have cash during crises, and Wall Street actually had. And that's how Wall Street ended up buying a lot of single-family houses, and now this was the market of Wall Street. And when you have so much demand from Wall Street, what do you think is happening to the home prices? Home prices suddenly started growing. And that's why if you go back to the period after the 2008, I have the chart right in front of me, you will suddenly realize that starting from this point, house prices started to grow. Like at this point, house prices were around $200,000. And now a few years later, you will find that house prices in 2018 have peaked at around $320,000 or $340,000. And that's because Wall Street got into the game. And you also have to understand the simple fact that when Wall Street gets into the housing market and they start buying houses, they can also finance a lot of those houses. When you go and buy your house and you got a mortgage, you're trying to make sure that you have a very good credit score, you have a good job, you have a stable income so that the bank is going to give you a very low interest rate. But when Wall Street gets a loan to buy those houses, they will get it at the bare minimum mortgage rate they possibly can. So they will outbid anybody in the market regardless of how good your credit score is. You cannot possibly compete with Wall Street, especially when they are not going to buy one house or two houses. They will go out there and they will buy like 10,000 single family houses. That's what Blackstone actually does. And even if you take a look at the numbers right now, you will realize that in a lot of American cities, something between 25 to 40% of all the single-family house purchases in 2020, in 2019, in 2021 were made by Wall Street. And that's another thing to consider is that in 2020, for example, another wave or another opportunity that actually gave Wall Street to start buying houses. Now, first of all, remember what happened with the Fed? The Federal Reserve suddenly lowered interest rates to the bare minimum and mortgage rates were like 3.5%. Not 3.5%, it was like less than 3%. The interest rate by the Fed were set at 0.25%. So hedge funds suddenly had so much access to the cheap money. And guess what they did? They're like, we are going to buy houses. Because they took a look at the mortgage rates and they were like less than 3%. And they did the math is that if we're going to borrow a lot of money and buy a lot of houses, house prices will rise substantially in the next year or two, or maybe in the next even 3 years. And that's exactly what has happened because a lot of people saw an opportunity. And first of all, the first person or the first entity that actually took advantage out of it was Wall Street. So that was another wave of overbuying houses in the market. Another thing is that back in 2020, a lot of people lacked cash and Wall Street had a lot of cash, more cash than a lot of people. And because there was a very low inventory of houses in the market, that led prices to actually rise substantially again. And that's why even if you take a look at the numbers, for example, where are the numbers over here? Now, if you go back, for example, in 2020, the average house price was $317,000. Suddenly, within a span of 4 years, they grew to $420,000. So, in 4 years, house prices rose by over $100,000. Do you see why did that happen? Because of that demand that was fueled not just by average Americans, but also by Wall Street. And that is and that is why, if you kind of paid attention, that around 30% of all the house purchases in a lot of American cities were actually done by financial institutions. And now the question is that, how do we fix the problem? Now I got it. We have this problem. We've got Wall Street into the game. The question is that, is it possible to fix the housing market in such a way that most people will be able to afford a house? Well, let's take a look at the numbers. Now, in order to make housing affordable again for most people, a few things should happen. Number one, maybe house prices should go down. That is one option. So house prices right now are $420,000. The median household income is what? Is $80,000. In order to make houses affordable again for most people, let's say, for example, the average house price is going to be 3 times the median household income. That would actually make sense, right? That was the situation for most of the American history, probably, if you go back to the 20th century. And that means that house prices should go down from $420,000 to something like $220,000 or $240,000. That means that a 50% decrease in house prices. Now, something like that is not going to happen. We have to forget that thing, because that means a total collapse of the housing market. And when we have Wall Street so heavily invested in the housing market, they won't let that to happen. The second thing that we can actually do in order to fix the problem with the housing market is, of course, just increase the median household income from $80,000 to somewhere probably where the median household income is going to be, let's say, a third of the median house price in the country. That means that we have to increase this $80,000 to something like $140,000. Now, let me ask you this. If it has increased, for example, from $61,000 to $80,000 within a span of over 30 years, do you think it is going to increase, for example, to $140,000 within the next 5 years? Well, of course, it's not going to happen. Even in the next 10 years. Probably that will happen in the next 50 years. And that's why this is also not an option at all. Now, the third option we have, and this is probably the best option in the market, is that we are going to lower down interest rates to the point where mortgage rates are going to be somewhere around 3.5%. Now, for this to happen, the Fed has to lower interest rates maybe to 2% or maybe lower than that. Only in that case it makes sense. But from the previous video where I talked about the problem of the national debt of the United States, where the national debt has crossed 120% of the GDP, I don't think the Fed is going to lower the rates to less than 3% in the next couple of years, especially in 2025. Is it possible that the rates will be lowered, for example, to 4.5%, maybe 4%? Yes, that's absolutely possible. But in that case, mortgage rates are going to fall down, let's say, to 5%. That is still not affordable for most people. So none of these solutions will actually work. I'm not saying that there isn't any solution at all, but based on the reasonable solutions that we have in front of us, these solutions don't seem like they are going to work, because we can't lower down house prices, we can't substantially increase the median household income. That will take many years, probably decades, and we can lower down interest rates in the foreseeable future. So buying a house, let's say next couple of years, is probably one of the worst decisions you can possibly can. Even if you can actually afford even if you want to afford the house, you probably won't be able to simply afford that house. Back in the days, they used to tell us that the best way to actually invest your money is to buy a house. But if you actually take a $400,000 house, for example, and you actually get a mortgage, you will have a mortgage payment of $3,000 per month. And if you consider the fact that you're going to have a 1% maintenance fee, which means that you're going to make, let's say, around $350 per month in maintenance. Now, in this price right here, I have included insurance and I've included other costs that comes with buying a house. So you will make a total payment of $3,350 per month. And at the end of the period where you have actually paid off your entire mortgage, given the fact that the value of your house is going to increase by 3% annually, you will end up with a house that would cost around $970,000, or let's say $1 million, which sounds like a good idea. It's not really a bad idea. At the end of the day, you will end up as a millionaire, even though that you're actually buying a house that's just worth $400,000, and you are buying and you're getting a mortgage in order to buy a house with an interest rate of 7%. Now imagine if you, instead of buying a house, you're going to rent a house, and the difference, you're going to take that money and just invest it in the safest possible way, which is the S&P 500, where you will get an average return of 8%. Now, historically, S&P 500 had a return of 10%, but let's just be conservative and estimate an 8% return rate. In this case, for instance, renting something similar like that would cost you around $2,300 monthly. So the difference is around $1,000. And because when you're buying a house, you're making a down payment of 20%, which is $80,000, you're going to invest that $80,000 in the S&P 500, and you will be contributing an extra $1,000 every single month instead of actually paying your mortgage, but you're actually renting instead. In 30 years, that's investment you're making into the S&P 500, where you're just getting a conservative amount of 8% annually, you will end up with $2.2 million. Now, this is the problem. Historically, buying a house should be a better investment. I have been told that when I was a kid, you've been told that when you were a kid, and everybody just knows. I know that there are advantages that comes out with buying a house anyways, even if it's more expensive than renting, but there are also advantages that comes out with renting. I'm not telling you that renting is a better idea than buying a house. You have to make that decision for yourself, but given the fact that we have a situation where investing in the S&P 500 is clearly a much better investing decision than just buying a house, is simply telling us how broken the housing market is right now. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.